on. Hello everyone and welcome to our third part of our very first episode, our Halloween special. Playing Goat Z here, and talking with Joel and Jacob. And now we're on to sort of our main theme for today, which is Halloween, and how we should think of it as Christians. But first let's talk a little bit about what is the issue that people tend to have with Halloween? What certain parts of its themes that make it problematic?
That's too spooky for you, mate. That's all it's all about.
Pretty spooky 5 me.
mate, dude.
I think like few people, at least the initial thing against Halloween from like Ephesians something that don't deal with evil spirits and things, don't celebrate with them in that regard. So I mean that's probably taking a very literal stance on that. Also, I guess Halloween has nothing directly to do with Christianity. It's just basically just a secular holiday. The origins, obviously, you can probably talk about things in like a harvest thing, Celtic harvest thingy.
Yeah, so I was gonna
it's nothing necessarily
get into the origins in a minute.
The interesting thing about Halloween, when it comes to whether it's a secular holiday or not, is you look at things like Christmas and Easter, which to all intents and purposes in society, although they also have roots in pagan festivals that were co-opted by Christian missionaries, because it was like, hey, we can look at this and find a good thing in there that points to Jesus or points to something good about Christianity, and then became Christian festivals. These days, Christmas and Easter are both, in broader society, almost entirely secular things though, and Halloween's become the same. But the thing that I think is interesting and that differentiates Halloween is that Christians celebrate Easter and Christmas as though they are more than just a secular holiday, but when it comes to Halloween, we seem to have gone, the whole secular thing, and maybe it's particularly pronounced in Australia because it's not a Halloween. Halloween's not a holiday that's been traditionally celebrated here. But we don't find a Christian element in it, and I think maybe that's at the core of a lot of the concern over it. Easter and Christmas, even while the world is just making it about the chocolate and the presents, Halloween. With Easter and Christmas, we're making them about Jesus. Halloween, the world's making it about the trick-or-treating and the candy and the eating lots of food. And we're going, yeah, trick-or-treating, candy and eating lots of food is what we want to be on about as well. There's nothing about it that's different for us.
Australia also celebrates it quite differently to America. In America, it's much of a big thing. Whereas Australia's like, yeah, it's not a hot, no, it's like an event, party, or do things. Yeah, it's a bit different between the two countries, because it's really, I think, at least I see Halloween as a big thing in American culture. Not so much in Australian culture. Like, we can't do it because, yeah, why not? Australians love that.
That's it, man.
So, and it's sort of like a pink party, if that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, as a Christian, I don't see any benefit in celebrating it, but I don't see any inherently evil in the idea of Halloween. Although, personally for me, I wouldn't dress up as a vampire or a ghost, personally. I just wouldn't feel comfortable with it. That's probably a personal reason rather than a physical reason. But yeah, I'm keen to hear your thoughts though.
So I was going to talk a bit about, and Joel pretty much covered out, talked about how Christmas and Easter were Christianized pagan celebrations, and that's, ironically, that's Halloween too. Halloween is sort of a Christian celebration, or at least it was made into one and then sort of transformed back later on. But that's where the name comes from. Halloween, hallows like the Day of the Hallows,
All
the
Hallows
Saints.
Eve, yeah.
Yeah. So it started out. It was basically the harvest festival of the Celts. It was sort of the, well, not really. I think it is the harvest. But it was the border because they had 4 months, and it was the border between the start of the winter month, which was sort of liked. It was cooler. You'd harvest. You'd do those things. But then it's on the border between the bad part of the month, which is the Samhain. So if you hear that, if you ever see one of those Christian Facebook things talking about, it's about the worship of the demon Samhain. No, it's not. Samhain was their month. It was their winter. It was the dark part of winter, which was associated with like death, but also not quite in a evil sort of way. Like this was the time of the year when lots of people would end up dying. It was the time of the year when, because of all the death, there was spirits around and stuff like that, which is sort of where a lot of these starting things came from the festivals, like the lighting of lanterns to guide or to ward off spirits, dressing up as spirits to either keep yourself safe or to just venerate them. Like all myths, everything has several meanings, especially at different times. And so when the Celtic nations, well, the British Celtic nations, sort of converted to Christianity under Rome, they ended up, the popes decided to sort of use this holiday, and rather than venerating the ancestors, like the pagan ancestors, they would venerate the sort of Christian ancestors, the forefathers of the faith. And also, like, I think in the Catholic calendar there's about 3 days of it. You've got I think it's, I don't remember the order, but there's one where you commemorate all the Christians who have died. There's one where you commemorate the saints who've died, and then there's a third day that I don't actually remember at all. Maybe there isn't a third day, maybe there's only 2. But that was sort of his solution. He saw in it an opportunity to reach people by helping them to remember, like, because remembering the ancestors could be a good thing too. Remember the Christian ancestors, remember those who've strove for the faith, and it's a time to sort of think about death and the hope that we have in death. I think that was the third day, actually, thinking about death and our future as Christians in it. Eventually, as like a modern Halloween, we tended to strip that away, and well, we stripped everything away basically, and it just became, hey, ghosts are cool, right? Let's dress up as ghosts and demons and stuff, or not even that this day. Let's dress up in skimpy nurse outfits. But we just kind of turned it into a party. I think a lot of I think the reason Christians sort of, or Western, actually it's a Western holiday, so that doesn't even matter, but Christians sort of dislike it so much is because we've tended to, we're in this sort of weird place where we don't really know what to think about spirits and mythology or ghosts or ancestors anymore. Because on the one hand, like lots of people sort of think that these are real things. You got the mention of them in the Bible. It's not, hey, these things aren't real, ignore them. It's, hey, don't mess with these things, basically. Trust in God. Some people take that. Some people take the sort of view that there's none. Obviously, there's no other gods, and that's true to everyone. So, oh, well, maybe these things are demons. It's all demon tricks. Or they get focused on, because a lot of the mythological monsters, like the vampires you mentioned before, and that sort of stuff, I'm pretty sure they would have predated Christianity too, but they became heavily, as Europe became Christian, obviously they became pretty Christianized as well. Like the true horror of a vampire wasn't wasn't getting the immortality and the super strength. the true horror of a vampire was losing your salvation because you became an undead monster through being infected by this. Anyway, that was a tangent.
I think vampires were 1500s. I didn't think they were over 2000. But I could be wrong on that.
They're very old. They're Slavic from a long time ago. That's sort of like Middle
Okay.
Ages is sort of when they became known to the West, at least.
Yeah, but that's not 2000 years ago. Wasn't
Yeah, say
Vlad the Impaler the
2000.
first one, or am I thinking something else? Anyway,
Yeah. Anyway.
I
So I
guess
guess-
for me, like,
You go on.
it's the difference between celebrating them in and just like being aware they exist as a fictional character. That makes sense? The difference between the two.
Yeah.
But you know, like, even to like superheroes and that, I know they exist as fictional characters, but I don't celebrate them as being a real thing or anything.
Oh, you don't celebrate Batman Day?
Man, you're missing out. Batman Day's the best.
But I like my parents.
The sad thing is, I'm pretty sure there would be a day for Batman. There's a day for everything these days.
And if you like your parents, Batman Day is a good day to celebrate because he's the one who's protecting you from the bad guys who want to hurt your parents. Come on.
Isn't it be the new moon, the Dark Knight?
Nice.
Get stuff.
Not
I think it's a good point you raised though, Jesse, about we're not quite sure how to feel about demons and spirits and spooky stuff. There's a lot of, and it's going to sound condescending when I call it superstition, but I'm going to call it superstition because that's how I see it. There is a lot of superstition within Christianity. There are a lot of people who almost have this, you know, the kind of fear of spiritual stuff that makes you kind of go, do you actually believe that God's in control, or you know? And on the one hand, it's kind of like, oh, well, that's dumb. But on the other hand, you know, you have these passages in the Bible that talk about, you know, well, I always go back to the things about like eating food sacrificed to idols and stuff like that, and how, you know, Christians who have this knowledge can partake in this stuff with a clear conscience. But if you can't, if you think there's actually some power in this thing, then for you to do that would be to sin. And you know, when it comes to this idea of demons and spirits and that sort of thing, you know, for me, who takes that whole side of things with a grain of salt more often than not, you know, it's very easy for me to go, oh, Halloween, I'll do that, you know, dress up as the devil, and, you know, but for someone who doesn't see it that way, they're gonna go, what the hell? This is gonna, like, literally, what the hell? This might cause someone to stumble, and the Bible talks about this not in a way to like put people like that down, you know. It's not saying, oh, it's respect people who aren't, you know, at that level of confidence yet, and don't you know, push them away, don't put their faith at risk just to flaunt your own freedom. Be showing respect and honor to those who aren't confident, and build them up rather than like asserting your freedom. So that's made me think a little bit, you know, about this kind of thing. Should I be so cavalier about my attitude towards Halloween? I don't know.
Yeah, and you mentioned there, like the key verses that shaped my idea on it too. So it's Colossians, I'm pretty sure all that's in.
1 Corinthians chapter 8 and Romans chapter 14, and there might be some stuff in Colossians as well.
Okay. I think Colossians might be the New Moon Festival one, which is actually a very similar thing. Except they were talking about the
Batman
Jewish
Day,
ones
yes,
there, I
okay.
think. So yeah, there's a couple of places where this sort of thing is mentioned. But yeah, I think the gist of it there is, obviously examine your own faith. Is this something you're capable of doing? Or is there... or is it a stumbling block to you, or to people you know? Do they think, oh, this is This is evil. We're doing stuff related to spirits that aren't God. We're worshipping them or just venerating them, giving them more respect than they deserve. Maybe we're doing something evil by this. Obviously, don't do that, because that's sin to you to do that. You're doing something that you think is against God, and you're deciding to do it, even though there's nothing in it.
Yeah.
There's nothing actually in it, and it's well within our freedom as Christians to be able to partake of these things.
But the fact you're doing it without faith is sinning against your own conscience.
Yeah.
And that verse from Colossians is chapter 2, 16 and 17. Do not let anyone condemn you in matters of food and drink, or of observing festivals, new moons, or Sabbaths. These are only a shadow of what is to come, but the substance belongs to Christ.
Yeah.
That makes sense, because that's on the Bible.
I do think, however, that I mean, obviously we're going to be careful out with our Christians, but I think we can often put a big barrier between ourselves and our culture by not taking part in all this. Got distracted because I became some sort of bookshelf monstrosity. But I think because often, like especially with kids, I think, like I've often heard about parents and like other parents, non-Christian parents, they get all confused or all just sort of not quite condescending, but disapproving of, oh, they're not even letting their kids have fun, and our kids don't get to hang out with theirs, or they're not being part of our Halloween get-together thing. It becomes this sort of barrier to what could be a good opportunity to get involved with the world. Like I like the, I got no idea which pope it was, but whoever decided that rather than getting rid of this important festival to the Celtic people, let's try and find some good in it. Let's try and find some way that we can do something that's helpful for the Christian life, to help Christians and those who the Christians will share it with in learning about God. And so I think there's definitely a way that we should be looking to try and do that with our modern iteration of Halloween. Try and, because it's like one example I've had talked about before, I don't know quite how it would work, but I haven't got any better ideas, but it's a day when people sort of become more open than usual to talking about death and the supernatural. So there's an opportunity there, because that's often stuff, at least in Australia, that people aren't often open to talking about. So you've got an opening there to talk about Christ, about how we do think there's a supernatural, how we think of death and how we don't fear death. And we don't fear the supernatural either, because that's actually still a thing pretty common. People fear ghosts and sometimes even other supernatural creatures. But the goats just appeared and I got super confused. But I think I finished what I was going to say.
This idea of not being disconnected from culture is a very important one, though, yeah. Because it's like what Paul talks about in Corinthians when he talks about, you know, I became like a Jew to reach the Jews. I became like a Gentile to reach the Gentiles, and so on. This idea of, you know, instead of going to someone and going, everything you're doing is wrong, come and change everything you're doing to the way I'm doing it, straight away you're putting people offside instead of looking for the, you know, showing respect to them and the way they do things, and instead of condemning everything they're doing outright, looking for the good in it, you know. Another example of that kind of thing would be Paul's speech to the Athenians, where he says, you know, hey, I noticed you guys are all like super religious, and I noticed you've got this statue dedicated to an unknown god. Let me tell you about this unknown god. He starts out by complimenting them on their religious observance, instead of saying, hey, you all are worshipping a bunch of dumb gods, you need to stop that and come and do my thing. He's instead like recognizing the good and finding a way to turn the kernels of truth in amidst the mess that was their religious system, and find some way to connect the gospel with that so that it's meaningful to them. And so this idea of, if people in our society are celebrating Halloween, instead of going, oh, well, I won't go along with that sinful practice, we go, hey, maybe there's something in Halloween that we can use to connect with, and obviously that's how the whole practice of Halloween started. Maybe we can get something like that going again. I don't know what that looks like, but yeah.
We also have in the Old Testament, there's another rather potent example of it was one of the prophets. I think it might even have been Elijah still. But he's approached by an Assyrian or Babylonian guy. He was like important general to the king, and he was a leper. He came to seek healing from the prophet.
Elijah or Elisha.
Yeah, and got healed and decided to worship the Israelite God now, our God, and but then he sort of said, because of my position, because of my culture, it's expected of me to walk with the king and be with him as he bows before the Babylonian, the statue of the Babylonian god. And it's expected that I go and do that as well. And he asked Elijah, is that okay? This doesn't mean anything to me anymore, but am I still able to do this? And Elijah, or Elisha, goes, yes, that's okay. That's something you can do with God. And we actually kind of have a counter-example with that too in like Daniel, what Daniel did, where he refused to bow before the Babylonian god, and that was part of his witness there. So, as always, it's complex, and there's a couple of sides and different approaches that can be used depending on the situation.
I heard a sermon on Daniel once talking about that, about how Daniel is an interesting example of what compromise looks like, living as a follower of God among people who are not followers of God. Because although Daniel refused to worship anything other than God, and although he and his companions wouldn't eat the food in the palace, the fact that they're still, we'll serve this king, and they took these names that were Babylonian names that I think honored some of the Babylonian gods and that sort of thing. There were elements there where they did things that some would have gone, oh, that's questionable, but they felt that's not a compromise of their faith. But there were other things where, hey, we can't worship anything other than God, so we can't bow down to these statues, and we can't, yeah.
Alright, so unless anyone's got anything more on Halloween, we might move on to sort of our bonus topic of what about with other, we'll keep it focused on supernatural, I guess would be the word at the moment, or rather than just going to sex and violence and the other things, because that's pretty much that's a different topic for another time. But especially around the supernatural, there's a lot of, or at least I've heard of a lot of Christian parents who won't let their kids do things such as read Harry Potter, or sometimes ironically even things like Lord of the Rings or C.S. Lewis. But this idea of keeping people completely sheltered from the supernatural, sort of the normal target.
It's interesting, because I grew up in a situation not unlike that. I didn't read the Harry Potter books or see any of the Harry Potter films until I was, I think, 17. Yeah, the interesting thing in that situation was, although I was never allowed to read Harry Potter, my parents encouraged me to read the Chronicles of Narnia from a young age. What am I saying? A young age, and I remember reading the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe for the first time and going, "This has magic in it. It's the same kind of magic that's in Harry Potter. You know, there's witches and there's all kinds of, and there's bad stuff and scary mythological creatures, and what is this? I can't read Harry Potter, but I can read this. No, this is the same kind of, if that's bad, this is as bad." So that was an interesting, almost a double standard, I guess, that I picked up on. But this, yeah, it was interesting to grow up with, you know, these certain things are off limits.
Yeah, I still haven't seen the Harry Potter's, Lord of the Rings, Narnia's, or any of them.
Oh my goodness, educate yourself, man.
I gotta watch Star Wars first.
It's only
You're
been,
making me
what,
so sad
7
right
years in
now.
the
I'm a
making?
sad nerd.
And all the other Star series. Yeah, I know, right? Well, yeah, I guess for very similar reasons. I was allowed to. I mean, like, I'm not the biggest fan in terms of fiction. Like, you know, you'll read. I think a fair few of us are into sci-fi. I think. I'm not big fans of magic anyway. I'm more of a hard sci-fi fan. So not hi-fi or fantasy sci-fi fan, but yeah, I don't think it's actually as big a problem as what's made out with, you know, reading books that have magic in it. Depending on what the expectation is, obviously. For example, I would probably struggle to recommend a book that had like direct, you know, Satanist or direct, you know, witchcraft in it. But that's, I don't know, that's kind of my take on it. In a positive light, anyway. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't think I'd really recommend giving anyone a book that's like, hey, all let's worship the devil and let's go be proper witches.
Come on, shouldn't the Satanic Bible be on my third grade reading list? That sounds like a good idea to me. I can't see a problem with that.
No, we got to keep religion out of schools. Gosh.
Oh, right.
Wait, we'll say another episode. No, but like for me, I don't mind. I guess now, anyway, if there's like the game Skyrim, I don't mind at all. Although I don't really play magic heavy characters often because I like the mechanics of physical. But yeah, I have a problem with that.
Well, yeah, but Skyrim magic is terrible.
I don't think.
I think it's a bit of a tangent.
Yeah.
This is not the illogical reasons.
It was just a snide comment.
Yeah, I'm going with.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I'm going with this is that I don't see a problem with that. Although if you start, I guess, saying that they're better than God's powers, and like, yeah, I mean, like it's kind of a weird sort of thing.
So I'm probably a bit of an interesting case in that, well, first off, I didn't grow up as a Christian, so none of this was a concern for me. But one thing I did actually grow up in, taking a pretty big amount of interest in, was, ironically, given I was like heavily materialist atheist, there's nothing beyond like the physical and what we could see. I had a lot of interest in like the supernatural, in magic, in the occult. Just basically any mystery of the world was my thing. So I just liked them as thought experiments, I think. But so I grew up with this sort of knowledge around the occult, around demons, around supernatural creatures, and in a lot of ways I still do and find it fascinating. But when it when I was exploring Christianity, when I was sort of first started thinking that, hey, I think there's more to this life than just the physical. I think there is some sort of supernatural element, and maybe even a god,